Hello everybody. For a while I've wanted to talk about ropes and pulleys, or lines and blocks, as we would talk to them and call them in boating parlance. But as we know, we don't necessarily need to use all the lingo, but we should, because lines and blocks are more of what they really are. So in our plans, we show people how to build inexpensive boats, obviously. And in those days, when they were put together in the 70s and 80s, a lot of places you couldn't really get marine supplies, and the middle of the country was pretty hard to get that stuff. So all of our boats were made with the idea that you could get stuff at a home center, or before home centers, just a lumber company or a hardware store. So we show in the plans how you use just normal hardware store line, rope, and pulleys, blocks. And those work fine, and we used them for many years, but there are some nice advantages to using proper marine sort of blocks and lines. For one thing, they spin like crazy, and you can hear the little ball bearings in these spinning. They just want to go and go and go, which is nice. So, and the lines, well, they don't stretch, which is nice, but they also feel a little better, and they work a little better, and they don't twist up as much as hardware store lines will. And unfortunately, in the last 10 or 15 years, lines that you get at Home Depot, places like that, they look like this. They'll be colorful. They'll look like climbing ropes, which you don't want to use, or marine ropes, which you do want to use. So they have little color and flecks and things like that, but they aren't really made the same way. They really don't have the same braking strength, and they have a lot more stretch, which isn't so good. So some of the things I wanted to talk about with this, what kind of, if you're going to go to get line at a West Marine or whatever, Defender or Jamestown Supply, Total Boat, all those different places. They're all great places. They're all, we've used them all. I don't know if I'd recommend one over another one. Just depends on what the prices are. Shop around. Old style line is 3-strand. And 3-strand is exactly that. It's made up out of 3 strands of filament. You can sort of see the 3 strands, we pull them apart. And it is stretchier, easy to grab onto, makes knots really nicely. They grab well. One of the wonderful things about 3-strand is that you can teach yourself how to splice it and make great little eye splices and fun little stopper knots and things like that. And the old Marlin Spike seamanship books are terrific, and that definitely fun. So 3-strand works. It probably actually stretches about the same as hardware store stuff, and it's pretty inexpensive, and it's definitely fits the old look of our boats. But I think that personally I would go with this sort of style. This is Stay Set. They're by what is it? New England ropes or lines, I think. This is what I use all the time. This is my favorite line. Marlowe is another company that's good. They make very similar equivalent. They're all about the same price, about the same performance. But this level, just look for Stay Set and figure out what that is. That's the stuff you want to try and get. Also, if you have access to a marine store, go and see what they have in their short ends of things. At the end of a project, they'll sometimes end up with 30 or 40 feet of something. This was a piece of warp speed, and warp speed is a very, very low stretch, very high strength line. I mean, I think this is 1/4-inch stuff. It probably could almost lift Volkswagen with this. Probably could, actually, which is kind of amazing. Very, very strong, very stretchy, or non-stretchy, stretch-free almost line. Hugely overkill for our boats. I mean, to the point of just silly. But if you can get it for half price, which this was when I got it, why not? Half price line is about the same as this, or maybe even less, and then you've got a nice piece of line, and it works well. Only thing it's kind of not so hot about these modern high modulus lines, like the Dyneema and Spectra cord ones. They don't like knots very well. This warp speed is good stuff, and this is about as far as I would go for actual use in a normal boat, because it has a cover And the cover is just normal polyester, and it can actually take a nice knot. And so you go through it, and you end up with a nice knot there, and it does well. The Stay Set stuff is, I think it's polyester also, but it's double braid polyester for both instead of high modulus fiber inside. And this stuff takes knots really nicely. So, and it's a little softer and just nice stuff. And it's a good price and there's no need to use anything else. Now, what kind of blocks should you get? I've got a bunch of blocks sitting here, and what are they? Back in the old days, you really pretty much had just, in the 70s and 80s, you would get stuff, Schaefer's and all those, and they would just have plain bearings. They were a little better than a hardware store pulley, but not really that much more improvement. And certainly not the Mike Harda stuff. That was not good at all. But then Harken came along, and Harken was a company, and they were ice boat guys, and they liked high strength, lightweight, easy to use, good performing gear. And so, because ice boats are extremely taxing on gear. And so they made up this style first, which is the original kind of Harken block. This particular one, you can hear it spin. It just goes beautifully, an aluminum sheave with, I think, Delrin ball bearings. This is, there's a little switch on here, and you can do that, and then it is a one-way ratchet, and these have little flats on it so that it kind of just grabs the rope in one direction and doesn't grab it in the other. So if you're pulling on it, you can pull in easily, and then you keep a little tension on here, and then if, I don't have anything to grab it against, if there's tension pulling back the opposite direction, you don't have to hold as much force. The block actually holds a lot of the line tension for you. So hex ratchets are like a one-way ratchet pulley, but when you let go of it, it slides back out, which is really cool. And that was a great invention, and you'd hear them back in the 80s. You'd hear the buzz of catamarans running around in the bay, and it was like, ooh, it's got fancy, expensive, special new stuff. In fact, there's even a joke in a fun parody, sailboat parody magazine about the a noise-making type of thing that makes people think you've spent the money for real gear. Nowadays, I don't think anybody even thinks twice about Hexa ratchets because they don't know what a big, huge improvement they were. So this is another kind of Harken. I think this is their little boat block. And this is a good size for our boats. This Harken Hexa ratchet, this size, 3-inch block, way too big for what we need for all of our boats, but because it goes on the main sheet, you're just going to end up wanting to have one of these, even though it's overkill size-wise, because you want that ratchet. It's just really nice. So that's that. This is a good size, actually, for our boats, as is this newer style. This is the older 70s, 80s, 90s style Harken. Then they went to these carbo air block things, which are injection molded carbon fiber, looks like. Kind of like the old nylon, but it's got carbon fiber in there. They're pretty great, actually. They're good price. They're pretty indestructible. If you leave them out in the sun, they kind of get a little gray, but they don't seem to lose their strength much. I've never noticed anything. Equally wonderful, easy, wonderful, easy flow of the blocks back and forth. Come on. Well, now it's going to hang down. But anyway, it's a great. These are just really a good solution. So definitely on the skipjack I set up, I had pretty much universally the carbo blocks. I think I had a Hexa ratchet in there. And then you can get them in little cheek blocks like this to run stuff around. The screws go through into your deck here, and you can make lines turn corners, which is very nice. These little micro blocks are about the smallest Harken makes. They're kind of nice, but they're really, I just use them for things like flag halyards. They're strong enough to do some stuff for maybe like our jibs, but they're really small, and they are limited in their size. I mean, you can get a 1/4-inch line in there, but well, actually you can, but it's kind of 3/16, 1/4-inch size, which personally, I kind of like going with, I think this is 5/16, kind of 5/16 or 3/8, because even though you don't need this much strength, it gives you something to hang on to, and it just is a nice feel. On the gaff rigs where you have the gaff halyard, the peak halyard rather, you have that backed up a number of times. I think it's a 4 or 5 part purchase. So by the time it's lowered down to the deck, you've got a lot of line in there, and so you probably do want to use 1/4 inch for that. The smaller lines will do fine. And that brings up another thing about blocks altogether. All these are pretty much set up right now as swiveling, which is great. You want blocks to swivel sometimes. But when you have, especially on the throat halyard, the peak halyard of the gaff rigs, sometimes there's a little bit of twist left in the line, either from its manufacturer or just the way it's been stored or for whatever reasons. And so what ends up happening is you end up with the lines, when you tension them up, they start to, these blocks can swivel, and then you end up with a twist in the loop of the purchase. And that adds a heck of a lot of friction, and it makes it so it's really hard to get the peak halyard or the throat halyard, whichever one it is, to drop back down. So in those cases, you want to actually stop these from twisting. In this size block, I think there's a little piece of metal that goes in there to stop it. Sometimes there's a little set screw. I think it's the same thing on this. This has a little set screw which can stop it turning. Can't remember how these work. This one is fixed, so it can't turn, but that's exactly what you want to have happen on the throat halyard, and probably for sure on the gaff halyard, gaff peak halyard, gaff peak halyard. You want the blocks to not swivel in this case, so that the line just stays as it's directed. Once you're down towards the deck and things are moving around, especially for sheets or for the lines where the halyards now run down to the deck, and sometimes you're going to run it over the cabin top or around the cabin, then you can go with swivel blocks. That's fine. And then finally, the last thing to think about is, what is this thing? This is a big shiny thing with an open middle in here. This is by a company called Garhauer, and they are, I think they sell just online, and they might sell at boat shows, but they're new for us in the last, say, 10 years or so. We didn't really know about them, and I wish we had earlier, because they're great. Garhauers they're now, I mean, in small sizes, the Harkins are pretty neat, but the Garhauers are really cool. They don't have a hexa ratchet style block, probably because it's patented, but these are, you can hear it spin. Delrin ball bearings, aluminum shiv. This case, it's a stainless frame. Really, really nice blocks, and they're about 30% less than the Harkins for the same performance. So go online and look at the specs for the different ones. I think I made notes, but let's see. So the 57 millimeter Garhauers, which I think is what this is, they are, oh no, sorry, 57 millimeter Carbo Airs. That's the big versions, which are kind of, they're 2.5 inch. So that would be somewhere between these two sizes. That's like the 25 series Garhauers, and they are, this I think is a 30 series, so it's a little bit bigger. But so it's going to be somewhere in the middle, which kind of would be what the size, the equivalent size of the Harkin would be. 40 millimeter Carbos, I think that is this size, pretty sure. And that is like the 20 series of Garhauer. And then the 29 millimeter this actually might be a 29 millimeter, although I guess this could be too. I'd have to get the measurement out. 29 millimeter Carbo Airs are about the same as the 15 to 20 series of the Garhauers, but the Garhauers in this small size are about half the price, but the Harkins are half the weight. So, you know, it's not really, weight's not that big an issue for our boats, because that's not really super like we're running boat against boat in match racing. So the larger, says in my notes here, the 57 millimeter Carbo Air ones are more than double what the equivalent Garhauers are. So, yeah, check the prices on them. I mean, as much as I love Harken stuff, now I am a firm believer in the Garhauer stuff, especially for like on our larger old vintage Cal. It's 34-foot Cal, and that I run Garhauers on all that. But for the little boats, I still kind of tend towards the Harkens just because these little Carbo Airs are a nice size and they're really good. So anyway, just poke around online. Garhauer's on, I think, basically only online as far as I know. That's where I've bought them. Harkens you can get at any marine supply place. So that's kind of handy if you need to just go run and get something. So anyway, there's a little bit of stuff about lines and blocks, pulleys, all that. Have fun.